women are inherently less valuable because everyone's got a type, and some people's type is fat bitches?
100%. So my cousin will only date fat girls. That's his type. It's what he likes. He has curved, beautiful, skinny women. So, like, you know, it could be your standard, and it would be my standard.
Do you think it's most men's standard?
Sure. But there's definitely a good portion of them that like
there's
girls.
enough out there, I suppose, if you have a big enough population. But you're saying when it comes to this value conversation, so I don't think we're talking about like their value as a human being. We're talking about their value in the dating and sexual marketplace.
Yeah,
is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, there are some guys that place value on that. That is what they are sexually attracted to specifically.
But so if we're talking about less valuable, more valuable, let's say there's a greater proportion of men who value women who are fit or who are thin, and while there are some men who will value an obese woman, that tends to be less than men who value thin, fit women. So couldn't you just make the argument then that they are less valuable in the dating marketplace?
I guess if we're doing statistics, yes. Like, but
it
should be clarified in that way. Like, to most men, they're going to be less valuable. But there's always going to be somebody that's into anything.
I don't think anybody ever really makes the argument that no man.
I don't understand. Aren't you a laissez-faire libertarian?
That would be your assessment.
Are you a laissez-faire libertarian?
Give me a specific example. And
do you believe in the economic model of laissez-faire economics? So like anarcho-capitalism, something like this?
No.
Well, what sort of economic model do you ascribe to?
I support capitalism.
Okay, so capitalism. So just take basic capitalism, supply and demand, right?
Yes.
Do you think that there's more men or less men demanding fat women?
I mean, like, we would have to take a poll, but my assumption is that there would be less women into it, obviously.
Okay, so
but I'm just saying we can't make broad statements.
Wait, if there's less demand for something inside of your economic theory, then it's less valuable, right?
Yeah, in that context,
so then they're less valuable. Glad we got that cleared up.
I mean, fair. But that's not how it was like laid out when I was listening to some of them. It seemed like a fat woman is not valuable, but if you can say she's less valuable in the dating market, I think that's fair.
Well, if we're having a conversation about dating, that is the context. And me and Andrew tend to make sort of these disclaimers when we're talking about value. We're not talking about your value as a human being, as a person, but we are typically specifically talking about in the dating marketplace.
Yeah, but even within that, there's still going to be some guys. But that's the only point that I was making.
I don't think we disagree there. Andrew, I'm sure you'd agree that we don't disagree that there will be men who find obese women attractive.
Yeah, right. We're just talking about basic supply and demand. So just like any marketplace, the dating marketplace would be a marketplace, right? Just it's no different than an electronics marketplace, a tobacco marketplace, whatever it is. The higher the demand for something, right?
Yeah,
usually it's more valuable because more people demand it. So this would be the same thing when you're talking about types of women, this type of thing.
Yeah,
you would agree to that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well,
I'm not ruling.
I don't think
listen, I'm not ruled by cognitive
then.
dissonance. I'm okay with like my view changing. So if you can offer me something that deepens my perspective, I'm absolutely like, I'm not like, no, I'm just going to argue this for the sake of it.
Do you object to value calls and value judgments when it comes to dating?
What do you mean? Like in regard?
Well, do you object to a guy who would not want to date a woman who's overweight, for example?
No, I think you can have whatever standard you want. And I actually agree with the standard about like men or women.
Your friend's fucking dying in the bathroom.
Not what?
I'm kidding. She's like dying. Never mind. Go ahead.
No, I think it's like one thing that I see argued on here a lot is that you guys will say it's fair for a guy not to want a woman that has a high body count. And I haven't really seen any good argument against that. And I actually agree with you guys.
Let me help you with that.
No, I agree that it's fine to not want to be with someone who has a high body count for multiple reasons.
Wait, let's go back to supply and demand. Do you think that men would prefer, just on average, to have a woman with a low body count or a high body count?
I don't think that men care as much as it's
No,
made
so
out
let's
to.
say for a second that we took you and made a perfect clone of you. Like, let's say, I don't know, you had a twin sister or something like this, but however it was that your thought waves and brain patterns work were mapped completely onto another woman, which is an exact doppelganger of you. Okay, and a man could choose. He fell in love with you. And the clone of you had slept with no people, and you had slept with 100 people, and it's the same person. Which one do you think the man would choose?
I think a large portion would want the girl who knows what the fuck she's doing.
That part.
Hold on.
Erroneous! Erroneous!
So do you think that they would prefer the promiscuous you?
Yes, this is a topic that's actually debated
Well,
online
then
a
what
lot.
you
that
should
can read
do
the
is
comments.
just look at the camera then and say that you're going to fuck a ton of dudes because you think it's going to raise your value to men.
Well, I don't give a fuck what anybody views my value as. I don't have a high body count, and I don't want to
Yeah, but why would it
down-regulate
matter
my
if you
fucking
did? It just means you're
oxytocin
more
receptors
experienced.
by sleeping with a bunch of people aimlessly.
Yeah,
Wait.
but wouldn't people love you more if you did? Wouldn't men love
Some
you
guys
more?
do prefer women who know what they're doing. They don't want to have to train somebody. Some
What?
men
Oh
men
my
are
God.
possessive and like want someone to themselves, and I think that's also fair. And one
Well-
argument that women have against that is like, oh, men only don't want a girl with a high body count because they're insecure. Even if that is the case, like, who cares? Like, they're allowed to
Well,
feel
I don't
insecure.
know. It seems to me that the value of virgins, since there's so few of them in society, has skyrocketed in the dating marketplace, and that men are competing over them a lot more than they're competing over women who are highly promiscuous.
Has this
Are you
been
competing?
studied? Is this like, are
And
there
also-
Actually,
statistics
yes.
on
If
this?
a guy's
has
a
been
virgin, to
studied
me,
on
it's
the
a turn off.
preferences- on the
I'm like,
preferences of
ew,
body
that's
count.
disgusting. If a
Men-
guy's a
Okay, let me
virgin.
answer
No,
a
no,
question.
Men and
on
women
men
aren't
Can we
the
flip
same.
this?
over
Can we switch this
virgins.
around?
We can, but just let us finish our argument. We're almost done. So, yeah, there has been studied for preferences for high or low body count, and men tend to prefer lower body count. Yeah,
Okay.
that's true, and they do tend to compete
has
Was
been
this-
a lot
studied.
more over women who are virgins. They tend to compete a lot more for them. So it seems that based on supply and demand, there's a lot fewer virgins, so the supply of them is down. The demand for them is up.
Okay,
Right.
but
So
what
they can de-virgin them. That's
No,
why.
what
'Cause they're like, I want a
percentage-
virgin so I can take her virginity.
what percentage of women
And
that
then
are
they're not a virgin
conventionally
anymore, so they're
attractive are
worthless, right?
going to remain virgins up until the point of marriage?
Very few.
Very few, right? So then that brings in the predicament of reality versus idealism, which is ideally these very attractive women.
Their round meatball donated $200. Dating marketplace is obviously different than a market for goods. If you want a more complete partner, some level of exploration is necessary.
Which is
Vigging is
exactly
bad,
my
but
point.
so is promiscuity.
Virgin is bad.
Totally agree.
I don't think.
Disagree.
I don't think
Disavow.
virgin.
Disavow.
No,
Mr.
every single marketplace. She's a psychologist. She should know this, right? Every single marketplace in economics also runs off of psychology. It also runs off of
Right,
consumer
yeah.
trust. It runs off of how people feel about the product. Successful marketing campaigns tug at heartstrings, has nothing to do with the product at all. So no, all
So what are
marketplaces
these studies
are
and like
essentially
how
the same.
recently were they done?
What's that?
How recent are these studies?
I have them. Nick, can you get those pulled up, please? There's like multiple studies, both of them, please.
What's the background on the studies? Were they just random men that they picked up
I'll
off the
have to-
street?
I mean,
Well, I mean,
and
to
they
be
got,
fair,
like,
we
gave
could
us
like
a
pick
rating?
apart any
Because-
study.
No,
Because-
many of these have had a meta-analysis. There
Nick,
have been,
can you pull it up?
a meta-analysis done on
There's-
these studies. I mean, that's
Did men?
the,
Did they
Scroll
do
up.
it for women too? Like, did they ask women what they
Scroll
thought
up,
about men that were
scroll up, scroll up.
virgins?
Okay, but this is
I would
not
love
what we're
to see
talking
that.
about.
well, no, yes, actually, we do have some studies on
Hold on.
that too. It seemed
So-
to be less important to women than it did
Hold
to
on.
men.
Nick, a little less zoomed in, please. Okay, scroll down just a bit. So there was a study in 2023 re-examining the link. Hold on. Re-examining the link between premarital sex and divorce. Scroll down. There was one in this other one, sowing wild oats, valuable experience or field full of weeds, personal relationships and some, I don't know. There's another one from 2018, fewer sex partners means a happier marriage. There's 2018 from Wolfinger, Promiscuous America, smart, secular, and somewhat less happy.
Yeah.
But
this-
there's
we agree on this,
1974
though.
premarital sexual behavior.
But that's
and
not the
postmarital
topic.
adjustment.
The topic is, do men, where are the studies that specifically say that men
Men
prefer women with less body counts as
Show
opposed
the next
to
tab,
not?
Nick. The next one.
And I don't discredit that you could be right. I just haven't seen
There's a
any data
whole
about
bunch
it.
of
Because
Well,
those
then
were
I guess
not
if
good
I wanted
examples
to
of
be with a
that.
guy that
promiscuity and
wanted a virgin, I
infidelity.
could just
Still
say
not
I'm
the
a
topic.
virgin.
Have
Well,
they
if there's
given
27
correlations?
2017.
Okay,
You're
so
not gonna love
listen,
me if I'm not a
I
virgin.
can
2005.
I can agree with all of this. By the way, I am highly aware of the neuroscience behind why having a bunch of sex partners is not good for you. It essentially down regulates your fucking oxytocin receptors, and for men, dopamine. Well, both women and men, but more so with men, the vasopressin and the dopamine. So it's not good. If you want someone who can actually emotionally connect, you're gonna find that person less likely, because what happens
You're
is
talking about pair bonding.
you create like a neural imprint. And
Then why earlier did you just say that most men would prefer women with high body
no, I'm not saying
counts?
most.
They're
I'm
less
just
likely
saying
to be
I
able
don't
to
know
pair
that it's
bond.
the case that men care. Like I've heard and I've seen on online debates, a lot of men say they would prefer to be with someone who knows what they're doing, who has a little more experience.
I think those men are probably just trying to sleep with
I
you.
personally think it's having a high body count is not ideal. Like for me, because it's the same
Why not?
issue in men, because I want someone with properly functioning dopamine receptors who's not going to be more prone to risky behavior, and that can actually pair bonds and be monogamous, because that's what I would want out of a partner. Also,
So why would you make the assumption that
promiscuity
this
can
not
also
through the other direction?
promiscuity can also reflect like mental health issues, not to stigmatize them, but like you have
Right.
higher promiscuity
So
with
it's
like
proxy
BPD
for
and
mental
NPD.
health issues. That's another justification for a man not wanting to date somebody.
Right. I'm not saying that those reasonings don't exist, because I agree.
But you're trying to justify.
No,
well,
I'm not trying
she
to
has a high body count because of mental health. Mental
No.
illness.
I think it's fair for someone not to want to be with someone with a high body count, because it could reflect mental health issues. Because high promiscuity is associated with things like BPD, and we have millions of years of evolutionary biology coded into our DNA, geared towards self-preservation. So it's fair to not want to be with someone who has a high body count.
Sex isn't this
You're more
That's
at risk
interesting that
for
you bring
STDs.
up evolution. How would you pre paternity test make a determination on if a child was yours from a man's perspective? How would you do that?
How would what?
Pre-paternity tests, which are recent, from an evolutionary standpoint, how would you as a man be able to make a determination that a child a woman had was yours?
Looks.
What do you? Oh, okay. So I mean, I guess.
How would you determine that?
You would just look at them and see if they look like you, I suppose.
Well, if they were more chaste, right, they had less promiscuity, then this is a woman who you could count on likely to actually be bearing your child, right?
Right. So listen.
So wouldn't that be wired in as a
agree.
preference then, evolutionarily?
It could be, but I think the dating market is vastly different because of second wave feminism leading to hookup culture.
Just to
and
be
shit.
clear, so when was second wave feminism?
I don't know the fucking dates.
Within the past century?
Yes.
Do you think that the evolutionary basis that Andrew's arguing about has been undone in the course of less than 100 years?
Definitely.
To some extent, yes,
No,
absolutely.
You don't. That's not how.
Okay, make a poll then.
That's not how evolution.
Make a poll. Make a poll. Let's ask the guests. No, listen, I agree with you guys on this. I'm just saying you can't say that all men, or even the majority of men prefer.
Yes,
we're not putting anything in a
You
monolith.
are saying the majority
Yes,
of men prefer
I would
it.
say the majority of men prefer.
And you could be right, but how? Like, where are you drawing this conclusion?
Let me ask you a question. If you look up into the sky, and I say that the sky is blue, do I need a study to prove that the sky is blue?
What in the false equivalence is that shit?
It's God. So you want a study that indicates that men have been surveyed? How about this? If I ask my chat,
well, the
if I were to
burden
ask
of
my
proof is
chat-
on you. So if you're making these points, then yes, you should show a study, not in regards to divorce or any other shit that you just pulled up. But if you're gonna say men prefer women who don't know what the fuck they're doing, I'm just saying, like, you can look online and see men talk about this all the time.
So let's dive into this real quick then. Let's find out, and we'll test your logic and see if that's true. You're requesting empirical data as the burden of evidence for whether or not this can be demonstrated to you, which I think is fair. But what if we could logically demonstrate it for you? That's also another way in which a thing can be demonstrated to a person that does not require empiricism, correct?
It depends on the topic. You can't I don't think you can apply that to any argument stance.
Well,
if you're going to speak on behalf of other men, it needs to be studied. Their
empiricism itself is just a foundational ethos of I believe X. So, like, you would have to justify why we should even use empiricism. But that aside, yeah, I mean, hang on, you would. But I'm just going to grant that maybe we could, as long as you'll grant that I could also logically demonstrate something to you as well. Because you'd have to logically demonstrate why we should use empirical data. I'm just going to grant that we should. But if I can logically demonstrate for you, for instance, that most of the world is religious, most of the world is religious, not some. And most of the religions of the world have some kind of virtue ethic when it comes to sex. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, then there must be some preference for promiscuity
Does that mean they uphold
being
it,
bad
though?
from
Does
the
that mean that they
position of
uphold
both
it?
men and women.
I mean, you could also argue that someone who is promiscuous is probably more fertile. Like I mean, you could really dive into that on all
That does
kinds
not
of levels.
contend with my argument that I just gave you at all.
Okay, but
So
that would be
most
to
of the world
assume
is
that
religious,
right, but that
and
would be-
most religions. Stop. Let me make the argument again,
Okay.
and then steelman the argument before you respond to it.
Okay.
The argument is, if most of the world is religious, most religions have a sexual ethic which is against promiscuity, which they do. Then it seems that people must have some preference against sexual promiscuity. That would be a sound conclusion. Can you steelman the argument first and then give me an argument counter to it?
I think what you're saying is valid, but I think that not everyone who's religious upholds religious values by far. By far.
There
We would
are
not have-
outliers.
That's a non sequitur. What's the argument?
The argument is that until there's actual data saying what men prefer, then all of this is just hypothetical bullshit.
It can't be hypothetical. We have empirical data on religion. We
When was
know
religion
empirically that most of the world is religious.
Right.
We
When
know
was
that
religion
empirically.
formed? When was religion formed? You have to take into context society at the time that it was formed.
Why do we have to do that
we
for
don't,
when we're
because we
talking
don't live in
about
that climate
modernity?
anymore. We don't live
Wait,
in that
why
climate
would
anymore.
that's no. That's literally that's a genetic fallacy. What are you talking about? That's a fallacious form of argumentation.
People who
Why
created
would we
the
have to
religion-
go to when a religion was formed to make a determination that right this second most of society is religious? In most societies of the world have some kind of religion they adhere to with sexual ethics which are against promiscuity. Therefore, there must be some preference against promiscuity, unless you can give me a counter argument to that.
I'm not saying that there's not a preference. I'm saying, and most of the people that would be in favor of women who are more experienced are not going to be religious to begin with. So you're adding all these variables.
That's not a counter
They're
argument.
kind of cucks, to be honest.
I mean, I don't
That's not a
disagree.
counter argument. Like, what's the counter argument to it? Some people might not be religious. I know. I'm granting that. That's
Right,
baked
but
in,
you're
right?
trying to
We're
add in a
saying
bunch
most
of
of the
variables
world.
that may not be applicable in today's society. I don't know very many people who have said things along the lines of I prefer a woman who's more experienced that are religious.
Most of the people in the world do not live in Western societies. Most do not.
Okay,
They
so
live
are we
all-
having a world debate or an American
we're
culture
talking
debate?
about Muslims, and we're talking about Jews, and we're talking about
Okay.
Christians, and we're talking about all sorts of different religions which exist. There's almost in all of them an ethic against sexual promiscuity. Almost all of them.
If we're talking about
There
the
must
whole
be
world, then
some
yeah, that's
preference
absolutely
then
fair.
against promiscuity, right?
Yeah, if we're talking worldwide, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, you don't think that human beings evolved? You don't think that men, the ontological nature of what is a man in a Muslim nation is different than the ontological nature of a man here, right? I mean, they're the same. They're both men.
I think
So why would they have a preference there? Distinct from a preference here, for all of us who are religious seem to have this preference, and most people are religious.
There's multiple factors that go into a person's decision making, and religion is not the only thing. There are social aspects, generational aspects, and are you arguing that what things are like in Egypt right now are similar to America? Are you saying the cultures?
No, there's going to be a cultural. Of course, there's going to be cultural
exactly.
distinctions
So then-
between them,
so
but the
then
religions can be uniform even absent culture. So, for instance, Muslim religion in Africa could be exactly the same religion which is followed in the middle of Qatar, whatever, right?
Sure.
The point is yeah, we can even take into account these cultural considerations. But if most of the world is religious, and you agree that it is, and we can empirically demonstrate that, you empirically know that that's true, then I don't understand how I haven't given you a good logical demonstration.
Because we also know
it
that
seems
religion
that
is
most people
on
are
the-
against promiscuity.
There are less and less religious people as time goes on. Like we
Only
can't,
in the
we
West.
can't pretend. Okay, so I live in the West, so that's what I'm debating.
Yeah, but
I already
so
gave
what?
you. I already gave you the. If we're considering the whole world, then absolutely that's fair. But if we're talking about American culture, I just don't think it's fair to say that most men want a woman who's a virgin or inexperienced.
Most people in the United States identify with a religion. Most.
Okay, well, you would. I mean, if you
Yeah,
would,
you're
if you have
talking about
stats on
somewhere
that, then-
between 19 and 30% who self-ID as agnostic or atheist, and even those people will often identify as being culturally Christian. So the thing is that if that's true even here, the majority of people, even here, and the immigrants which come into the country, come in usually with a religious background. South America, especially, they're Catholic. If they're coming in from the East, they're Muslim, or they're
but there's
Orthodox
many other
Christians,
religions.
this
Okay,
kind of thing.
there's even Christian sects that allow polygamy, and then there's all the different sects of paganism that don't give a shit
There's very few,
about
and the
things
West
like
does
that.
not allow polygamy. It's not only illegal; it's considered immoral.
Okay,
And the
so
Christian polygamists are not allowed to be polygamous.
Okay, maybe not legally, but you want to act
No,
like
not
Mormons
even
don't
not
have
even
multiple.
spiritually.
Is it legal in Nevada?
No, it's not legal to be a polygamist in Nevada.
Okay.
Wait, so
There's
let me
other
ask you a question.
religions
Let me
at
ask
play,
you a question here. Do you think that men are thinking, I like her, but I would like her more had she fucked more men before me?
No, I don't think it's a matter of that. I just think sometimes guys want a woman who's more experienced, and unfortunately, they're not
No.
going to find that in a virgin.
Okay,
That doesn't
I would
mean that she
argue
had to
the
have fucked,
men,
like, 50
the men
people.
that want. First off, let's be real here. Most pussy is good pussy. It's really not all that hard. Sex isn't this complicated procedure, especially as a woman. For women to be good in bed, it really doesn't take much. So this idea that the more sexual partners you've had, that also, actually on that note, wouldn't you argue that a woman who's had one sexual partner, but she's had sex with that partner 1,000 times, is going to be more sexually experienced than the woman who slept
it would
with
depend on how
100
experimental he
men
is.
one time each?
There's
Who's
so
gonna
many.
be-
There's so many variables to this. How experimental is that one couple? If they're doing the same shit every time, then they're not really. She's not getting a lot of experience.
Okay,
the one of the kind of cheap shots that's often used by pure empiricists is this idea of a multifaceted variables making the thing so complex that we can't actually make any deductions from it or inductions from it. But the truth is that correlates. There's usually primary correlates, and then there's kind of non-primary correlates. We still can look at primary correlates here when we're looking at data.
Yeah.
Right? You would agree that that's true. So
Yes.
just kind of waving it off and saying, hey, there's tons and tons of variables. Nobody's going to dispute that there's tons of variables, but there's still going to be prime correlates that we can look at. And that's what Brian's kind of pointing to, is these prime correlates.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm not saying that it's not a lot of men who would prefer to be with a virgin or someone who has a lower body count. I'm just saying you can't put this broad generalization on everyone, because even on social media, you can read through hundreds of comments of men saying the opposite. So I'm just saying objectively, until there's like
We're
a
not
recent
saying
study.
that these men don't exist. But
Okay.
generally speaking, if we're having a converse, we could talk about the dating
I don't know how
habits
general
of
it is.
dwarfs.
I guess it would
I'd be
depend on
happy
the
to look. You
age
want to
group
talk
that you're
about
talking
the
to.
specific dating habits of dwarves who live in Ecuador. We can talk about it if you want. But if we're speaking about just generalities here, we can arrive at some generalities. And generally speaking, men prefer sexual purity in women.
Maybe the men in the study.
I
What
just
study?
like I'm just
It
telling
does-
you,
I
like
think I
among
need
our
that
age group,
I
don't
need
think
not
that's the
even
case.
look at a study to make this determination.
Everyone's going to have their own
Brian, the
anecdotal
voice
Yes,
for all
of
experiences.
men.
course, there are.
And I'm
there are
telling
men,
you, in
fine.
our age group,
Yeah, there's a
in
lot
our
of,
age group,
sure,
there's
a
a
bunch
large
of
portion of men who prefer women who are more experienced. So,
No.
so it's not
Okay,
as
do you think
relevant
it's
to them
here, let's talk
how
about
many
something more
partners they
simpler
have.
then. Do you think it's a majority of men that prefer women with a lot of sexual experience?
I mean, I don't know. That's the whole point, is that I don't know.
You don't know. Okay, so then-
I wouldn't feel confident in saying yes.
So, just to be clear, if a high body count is proxy for promiscuity, do you think a man would prefer to date a woman who hasn't had sex in a year, or let's say date and sleep with? He'd prefer to sleep with a woman who hasn't had sex in a year, or a woman who fucked a guy an hour ago?
Well, yeah, for sure.
Okay. What about a day ago?
I mean, some men don't give a shit, but for the most part, yeah, I think
You don't
that
think
you
men
wouldn't
have
prefer that.
a disgust response
I
to
think-
a woman who's recently fucked another guy?
This is what I can tell you from having been a dancer when I was younger.
Hold on, let me ask
and
you a
done-
question. Didn't earlier you said that you wouldn't date a bi guy?
Yes.
Why?
For multiple reasons.
Because he recently had sex with another man, right?
Well, that was y'all's topic, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and again, my value system is very similar.
But do you have like a kind of a, what was your response to your refusal to dating a bisexual man?
I want a
was
man
it a disgust response? There's not a disgust. No, didn't you say like?
I want someone who's attracted to me and what I am.
Who was the one who said it would be gross because he just, maybe it was you. I forgot.
It wasn't me.
It was you?
Not
Okay.
me.
All right. But you wouldn't.
But I understand that perspective, yeah.
Right. So
no, so
that
like I
feeling,
absolutely validate that. I'm just telling you, like from my experience, having done OnlyFans when I was younger, being a dancer when I was younger, most men don't care as much as y'all would like to pretend.
No,
they
not
do.
most men.
I've never had a
Where's
man
your
ask.
Where's your
Literally
study
never.
for that?
I said it was anecdotal experience.
Oh, well then I'm just going to anecdotally dismiss it.
And as I was trying to get at the point earlier, is that men probably have a preference for attractive women that happen to not be virgins. Now,
what?
Because I was
she's saying it
alluding to the fact that a lot of attractive women are not going to be virgins.
Yeah.
Valdev donated $200.
And so,
pro-Christian atheist here. I can promise you men will gladly bang a whore. Very, very few man will wed a whore. This show exists to tell women how men think. Listen to what the men are saying.
You think it's a W? By the way, good to see you back in the chat, Valdev. Like, do you think that's a W for you as a woman? Well, guys still want to fuck me.
No.
Where's the ring? Where's the commitment? Where's the title?
Okay. I mean, I've been married for 10 years, and I was a huge whore back in the day.
So if we're talking
so there's
about
outliers.
me specifically,
There are outliers.
I've already said that I don't do OnlyFans.
Men
that
marry
I
porn stars.
Want to be with someone who is monogamous. I'm not
kids with
attracted to
porn
people with high body counts. I don't have a high body count. So
if I
me,
sat here and I denied that women are attracted to tall men, would you look at me like I'm an idiot?
No. And I don't. Okay.
You
no
think
one is.
women don't
no one
have
is
a general? You don't.
That.
You don't. Hold on.
Your
Be
point.
good faith here. You really think that women, generally speaking, don't have a preference for tall men?
Yes, 100%.
Everyone has a preference, and all the
no, I agree.
Different.
Yeah.
God.
I just think that.
What's the next topic?
I think that you guys hope that men view things the way you do, and I would hope that there was more men that view it that way. But in reality, I just don't think that's the case. I don't.
Yeah,
think
but
it's
I mean,
in
reality, we do think it's the case. So this is the problem with you.
I would be
at one side of your mouth. Bank. Hang on. There's a problem. At one side of the mouth, you bank on empiricism. And then on the other side of your mouth, to make your arguments, you bank on anecdotal evidence.
I just want to know how much sex both of you guys get.
I don't see any reason why
I want to know how much sex you guys both have had in the last.
I'm in the middle of talking. Calm down. So I don't know why it is that we should actually believe your arguments if they're just anecdotal.
I don't know. How many guys have you fucked the past 2 months?
That's a good question.
What's your argument? I don't know if you heard.
I just feel like men are angry that don't get.
I don't know if you. I don't know if you heard what
like,
she said, but
clearly,
she was like,
A
"I
and
wonder
B.
how much sex you guys have had." So, how many guys have you fucked the past month?
I asked you first. When's the last time you had sex?
Answer the question.
No, I asked you a question first.
I've already told you I don't discuss that sort of stuff.
Well, then I don't discuss it either.
Okay. All right. Well.
So onward.
It's fair. It's fair.
I'll discuss it. I'll answer if you answer. You ready?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's hear it.
Okay.
Wait, she hasn't agreed. Hold on, she hasn't agreed.
Oh, you haven't agreed? Yeah, we got to make sure we get an agreement. I'll
if
answer
Andrew
if you
discloses, will you disclose?
Yes.
That's fair.
Okay, great. I've had sex with one woman this last year. How many of you had
I said
sex
how
with?
much sex? How much sex have you had?
I have sex every day.
Ooh. As it should be.
Well, then good.
Yeah, how about you? Now answer, please.
Every day.
I've had sex with one person, and I've had, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 times.
In the
I've
last
had
2
sex.
months?
In
Was
the
that
last-
the question?
Yeah. I'm happy. What about you, Brian? Oh, wait, he doesn't disclose that.
I don't even understand the argument. The argument's basically like,
like
if you're a man and you have an opinion on this, your opinion's only valid if you've had sexual intercourse.
Anyway, all I'm saying is I think it probably is the case that maybe there's a little bit more, but I think a study should be done for me to feel confident agreeing to that, just because I've seen, again, and I admitted it's anecdotal evidence of men portraying one thing and then in reality not giving a fuck.
Yeah.
I've never had an OnlyFans friend that could not find men. I've never, and it really be like the most red-pilled dude. Like the sissy sub is the most red-pilled person that I know. And a lot of the subbers on OnlyFans are people's like coach dads or like the ones that like, I'm against OnlyFans. So I just have a hard time accepting without evidence that most men in today's society prefer virgins. But I understand the reasoning for preferring virgins or people that don't have a high body count. I don't dispute that in any way.
Okay, so look, here's the situation, right? Will a woman who's promiscuous, will a woman who's engaged in sex work be able to find a boyfriend? Yes. Can they find a husband? Yes. But we're having a conversation of what men prefer. So just because men might prefer one thing or another,
I think they just want to be the hot chick.
Yeah.
I think most men
want to
just
get
want to be the hot
laid.
chick and they don't really
I'll
care.
give you,
That's
look,
all. They want to get fucked.
I would prefer,
Exactly.
me personally, if it's between like a girl who's a 7, who's a virgin, and I'm talking, just to be clear, talking about her physical appearance here, Jesus Christ. Somebody's going to clip that shit. And then a woman who's like a 10, who slept with 100 men. I'd much prefer to date and have a relationship with the girl who's a 7.
I feel like the 7s are
And I think
fucking,
that's totally fair. I'm not arguing that at all.
like
Good for you. I just think most men don't give a shit.
Like the 10s
as much
are
as they
definitely
pretend to.
nowadays the 10s are definitely having like a lot of sex. It's like
I think most men are going to go for
but
the 10.
and then dating them out.
realistically.
But for 7s and above, they're still having a lot of sex.
And I hope I'm wrong, by the way. Like,
They're still having a lot of
love to
promiscuous
believe
sex.
that men really uphold the values that.
Hold on, but just to be clear, like the men you probably are around, you were a stripper. You did OnlyFans.
No. I'm around church men that literally procure. It's not the
What's your
people y'all
denomination?
think. I'm a non-denominational Christian.
Okay.
Should I pick a denomination?
finds
I guess
that
you could say
funny.
I'm a Protestant because I'm not a Catholic.
Okay.
I see how they push for that. You could classify me as that.
Well, we can go in circles on this the whole time. Did you not find the paternity uncertainty argument that Andrew made compelling?
Sure.
So there's an evolutionary basis. So, for example,
100%.
If a woman has 10 husbands and she's sleeping with all 10 of them prior to DNA testing, who's the father? You don't know. But if a man has 10 wives, you know who the father is in all instances. And you know who the mother is in all instances.
Yeah.
So for this reason,
I don't discredit that.
right, this reason, it's an evolutionary reason, paternity uncertainty, it's one of the biggest L's you can take as a guy to raise a child, like to think that the child's yours, where there's paternity fraud, to think that the child is yours, but it actually isn't. You got cheated on, you got cucked, major L for a guy.
Right, but like think about it. You just had Destiny on here recently. That is a great reflection of men these days. I don't think most men give a fuck. Like most men don't even want to have kids.
Well,
most
on
men,
most
men are cool with polygamous relationships. Like most men don't have the standard where they're like,
he's not religious. That's
You
probably
think that most men? You think that most men want to let their wife get fucked by other men?
I think a lot of maybe not their wife, but I think a lot of men just really don't give a fuck about this anymore.
Then why'd you say Destiny was a good reflection of the general population?
I mean, a lot of men are that way now.
There's not a lot of men. Demonstrate it for me.
Make a poll. How many people are polygamous? Like,
Not in
how can
this
I
chat.
demonstrate it for you when I'm not like?
No, that's not my question. How many
Taking down
men do you
stats.
think let other men on purpose bang their chick?
I think there's a lot of people in open relationships.
Give us a
these
percentage.
Days.
Let's see how many videos
how
are
many
on
do you
That's
think?
not a
cuckold
fair
videos.
question because it hasn't. If you can show me a fucking poll,
The
then I'll tell
United
you what it
States
says.
has
Why do
over-
I have to make your points
Do you think
for
that
you?
non-monogamy is on the rise? And do you think that religiousness is going down? Because both of those things are true in our country.
Yeah, but this is not you demonstrating for us that you think that guys like Destiny are a reflection of the general public of men. That's an insane claim that I would really like to see you justify somehow.
I'm telling you, non-monogamy is on the rise in America. Religiousness is on the downfall.
Getting married
Marriage is on the downfall. Divorce is at a crazy rate. So I think
Childbirth.
that really reflects that people don't really uphold these morals that were around fucking, even 20 years ago.
But look at
I think
what's
the
that
climate
led
is
to,
changing.
though.
That's not.
I know.
That's
I
not
1000% agree.
in any way. Listen, that is in no way, shape, or form. I'm going to grant all of those as being true because they, for the most part, all are true.
Okay.
That still has nothing to do with the claim that most men in the general public are letting other men on purpose bang their chicks. That's an outrageous claim.
I think for the most part, when you consider that religiousness is not as popular, non-monogamy is becoming popular, people don't care as much what the fucking body count is. Am I saying that they shouldn't? No, I think you should for multiple reasons. Like, someone with a high body count reflects danger on multiple levels, physically.
There is no reason for us to believe that because you're non-religious, you're going to let other men plow your chick.
No,
There's
but your
reason for us to believe
argument was
that
that religious people care about purity, and I don't think that's the case either, typically.
Yeah, but I think that most men, why do you get married even as a secularist? Do you think that it's so that you can share your chick?
No, but not everybody supports marriage, so how does that factor into the debate?
Well, most secularists are still getting married.
You're kind of proving my point. Less people are getting married, so if that's not a good debate topic.
But secularists are still getting married.
Okay.
So the thing is that secularists are still getting married, religious people are still getting married.
Want virgins or people like? I just want to see data that's backing the point, because what I'm saying.
You're making the point. That burden's on you, not on us.
No, actually, y'all made the point.
No, you made the point that the general public is like Destiny. He's a good reflection of the general public.
Going on a side tangent. The general point is that
you can just retract the claim and say you were wrong.
You say that most men prefer a woman that has a lower body count. I'm saying, show me any data that reflects that this generation of men give a shit, because I don't think they do.
I think if it's just to sleep with them, they don't care.
That they don't.
Okay.
Let us assume.
Exactly. That's not what I think they're talking about. I think they're talking about for long-term commitment.
But look, she's in a long-term committed relationship. I have multiple friends that are OnlyFans girls, porn stars, dancers, who are all in committed monogamous relationships. So these men obviously don't give a fuck that they're.
But she's not in a committed monogamous relationship, right?
Mostly, yeah. I mean, they live together.
It's very much. It's a very serious relationship. Yeah, and it is a very serious relationship. It's the most serious one I've ever had.
Oh, I wasn't doubting the serious. I meant about the monogamy, though.
It's just a little different, Just a little different than what you might think is like normal.
Well, that just kind of reiterates the point. Like, you can be in a serious relationship and not even expect monogamy, and that's becoming culturally normal. And I don't think
it's not culturally normal.
I'm not. You don't think it's culturally normal among our generation?
No. It's becoming more popular.
In the younger generation.
It's not culturally normal anywhere in the United States or in any Western nation that I'm aware of. If you're married or even have a girlfriend, that you on purpose allow other men to plow her. That is not a cultural norm. No.
Okay, so is the argument...
They're ostracized by other men. They're called cucks by other men. They're considered to be less virtuous. They're mocked. They're ridiculed endlessly.
Sure. But
that sounds like the opposite of a
Let's stay on the point. Let's stay on the point. It reflects that men do not care how many women a person has been with.
You can draw circles on the table, and that's good that you're doing it, because that's what your arguments are. They're circular.
No, you're trying to go on these side tangents to distract from the original point. Yeah. If you can show me data that shows that modern American men care about virginity or body count, then I will absolutely concede, because I've already displayed that I'm willing to do that.
But the problem,
your argument is not strong enough for me to do that on this topic.
But it doesn't matter if the argument's not strong enough for your skepticism. Empirical data is not a standard which must be adhered to when you have logical demonstration. So I logically demonstrated to you that there must be some preference for chastity, or most of the world wouldn't be religious with chaste religious values.
Okay.
It must be the case that they must value it to some degree.
Right, and I gave you that if we were talking about the whole world, and then I clarified that if we're talking about America, I just don't see anything that shows that men really care as much as you're claiming.
I got a question. If we were to do some poll, if we were to go into the street and approach 100 men, and we gave them two options, and we said, would you prefer to date a woman with a body count of 10 or a body count of 100? Do you think they would lean more towards one or the other?
Okay, let's make the question what you said earlier: a 10 who has a higher body count, or a 7 that has a lower?
No.
Well,
these
things factor in. Like, I think men care more about how hot a chick is than they do her body count.
Okay, so here we go. Personality, individual differences. You can find this study. It was done by Katie Sohn. Men's revealed preferences regarding women's promiscuity. In the abstract, literally right away in the abstract. Now, if you want, I can get into, because I think it's fair if you're doing anything that's empirical that you want to probably understand methodologies, things like this. But Men have evolved to exhibit a desire for chastity and sexual fidelity and an abhorrence of promiscuity in long-term mates.
Do you have it
We
next?
investigated whether these preferences
Are you looking it
manifest
up?
themselves even in an unlikely situation like prostitution by observing men's behavior. We considered 8,817 prostitutes under 45 who worked in Indonesian cities. We measured female promiscuity by experience in prostitution. So if we go ahead, without going into every detail, essentially in almost every section of this, they preferred less promiscuity. Now, you could say, well, we could adjust because they're comparing them to prostitutes and there's cultural stigma. I can
And also
understand that too.
We're also talking about America specifically.
Yeah, you can look at all sorts of different variables inside the study.
The
and I would grant
variables
that as
matter.
I would grant that as being totally fair.
Okay. So maybe
But
that's
I
not
just
the best
want to let
study
you
pull
know
up.
that what's interesting about it is that what's cited in the abstract immediately is that men have evolved to exhibit a desire for chastity and sexual fidelity and an abhorrence of promiscuity in long-term mates. Why would that be fundamental in the abstract from people who have an evolutionary view? Why would that be the case?
In the evolution, from an evolutionary perspective, it's 100% valid.
And
for
you
men and
believe in
women.
evolution, correct?
I do.
Then what the hell are you talking about?
I'm saying that in modern evolution is not the only thing that factors into a person's decision making. Yes, that's
You
the
just
primal
said that
biological
evolutionarily
thing.
men have evolved
Yes.
to not like promiscuity,
Sure, and
but
if we're
you're
gonna-
not convinced that men don't like promiscuity. I'm
So if
super
we're gonna,
confused.
I'm saying that there's many things that factor into a person's personality and their decision making. There's nurture, there's nature, there's evolutionary biology, there's
Mm-hmm.
generational influences. There's a lot of influences on what makes a person make a decision.
Yeah,
so
but what's
if we're
going to be the
boil it
stronger
down to the
correlate?
individual
So,
things,
for instance,
then
in
sure.
nature versus nurture, we don't really know. It could be 50-50. Could be 70-30.
fair.
We don't know. But when you're
Exactly.
talking about nature,
Literally
when you're talking
is my
about
point.
But when you're talking about nature itself, it almost always does come down to nature. You're talking about things like IQ, things like this.
100%,
right?
yeah.
There's only X amount that can be done from nurture. But the thing that's interesting is that even if we take into account, and let's say it is a 50-50 between nature and nurture, then your evolutionary biology of promiscuity, the nurture portion of that would also be brought down to the children from the biological parents who were evolved to not like the promiscuity. So you would have both of those strong correlates there.
You cannot like it, but what was the question on here, right? Like, that if a girl who does OnlyFans is less likely to find a partner, and your retort to that is it's because men want someone who's less promiscuous or doesn't have a high body count. I think even if that is the case, which I'm not saying it is because I don't know, I haven't seen anything that convinces me enough that men really care.
Except evolution?
Currently, okay, on an evolutionary level for sure, absolutely. But that's not
Okay,
the
so then
only
on the
thing that
nurture
factors
level, that's
into
gonna
the
be part of
decision
evolution
making.
as
And
well.
when it comes to if they're actually going to date an OnlyFans girl, I don't see many of them not in relationships or lacking
We've
because of that.
already granted you that women who do
yeah.
OnlyFans can get into relationship. We're not
Sure.
saying women who do OnlyFans, they'll be forever alone. They're going to be entirely precluded from ever having a male partner.
Yeah, but I don't think
That's
they're
not
even
our
less likely to
argument.
find someone though.
Wait, didn't you literally concede? I don't know if it was you.
I'm saying
you
it's
don't
fair.
you don't
It's
acknowledge that a woman who's involved in sex work, you don't think it closes the door at all for any men.
To some
To
guys,
most,
but
I would argue
that's the
most
whole point.
men.
Right, that's where we're having the disagreement.
So
I agree
most
with
would
you.
be
I just don't
most would be
necessarily
51% or more.
I don't necessarily.
You think
so.
51% of men want to date a woman? Let's do the
Even if they don't want to, that doesn't mean that they're not doing it. I could say I prefer a guy who doesn't have a high body count, and then I meet someone and I fall in love with them, and I'm like, you know what? As long as you're monogamous with me, I can look past it, and I think that
that's
happens a
you.
lot for.
I just
men.
have one last question, right? Because I just want to tell you on the other end of the study. Now, to be completely fair to you, I'm looking this up on the fly because you're asking for empirical data, right? So, I mean, you have every right to question it. But one thing here, the results that were derived from this particular study, it demonstrated that men exhibited those evolutionary preferences because they paid less to more experienced prostitutes and they paid more to less experienced prostitutes. Why do you think that would be?
To avoid STDs, I'm sure. But again, you're trying to
isn't
compare
They
prostitutes.
were-
Hang on, these prostitutes were vetted for STDs. That was a great
Thank you. Thank you,
donated
Meatball.
$500.
He's a brave and a decent
Okay,
man.
let's
He's a
mute
fighter.
Raven. Time to move on.
All right, we got to mute her mic for 10 minutes because that's a
Hang on,
mic
can I just finish it real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
They controlled for STDs. So why did they want the less experienced prostitutes and paid them more than the more experienced prostitutes?
10 seconds, and then we're
If
going to
I had to imagine, it would be to avoid STDs. Like you're going to associate.
Yeah, I know that was
less...
controlled for. They didn't have STDs, and the people participating in the study knew this.
Less experienced women are a lot easier to dominate.
Okay.
But wait, I thought that the reason that we value the promiscuity is because of those experienced women had experience. So why are they getting paid less?
Mute it.
That's weird.
Mute it. Mute it. We'll put her back on at 10.